Olay! Oh, we can't film yet.
Why?
I forgot to brush my hair.
Oh my god.
Hey guys, hope you're doing well this Sunday morning. I decided to wear a button up, dress up a little bit this Sunday morning, kind of ditch the sweats, ditch the hoodies, and yeah, just dress up a little bit today in quarantine. I hope you like it. I'm wearing my Anchors. I am super excited to be able to share with you guys another passage in the Bible that's really been on my heart for the last couple months, really, and something that's been very significant to me, very fulfilling for me. It's a passage that I've been able to talk with Pastor Chris Gray a lot about. On several occasions, we've been able to talk about this passage, and what we've been able to kind of converse and see has been really great for us. And Sean Peters, our associate pastor, I was able to talk with him about this as well a couple months back. And so yeah, it's just been a passage, really just a verse that has really been big for me lately. And it comes out of Mark chapter 15, verse 34. And it's when Jesus says, as he's on the cross, and in some of his last dying breaths, he says, my God, why have you forsaken me? And I know that might seem weird. Oh, why is this a verse that's been comforting? Why has this been a verse that's been significant to you? I think it's a lot of times it's a verse that makes us uncomfortable. It's a verse that we ask ourselves when we read it, did God really abandon his son in this moment? Is that who God is? Is that in his character? Would he do that? And because those questions kind of make us uncomfortable, we oftentimes kind of skip over it a little bit. We don't look in depth at what Jesus is saying and what these words mean, because they actually hold not only a lot of power, but they actually hold a lot of comfort as well. This passage, this line that Jesus says, the first time I kind of was introduced to the power and significance of it was a couple years ago when I was in Bible school. As you could probably guess, in Bible school, I tended to goof off in class. It happened. And to my professors, I apologize. But it did happen, you know. Me and my roommate, Josh, we were both Bible and theology majors, and we would occasionally get in trouble. We weren't like super bad, but we occasionally get in trouble in class. And one professor that we had, his name was Dr. Lyons. Dr. Lyons was a big name in the world of theology, in the world of biblical scholarship. He is the leading scholar in the world in the book of Ezekiel. He has a bunch of books published in that. He's one of the leading kind of technicians of the Hebrew language. These are big words, I know. Basically, he was a big guy. He was very important. And something he would do often in class is, in order to kind of help us to illustrate things, help us think, he would say things like, now with this, let's all put our theologian cap on, or let's put our historian cap on, or let's put on our sociology cap on. And me and Josh, being the goofballs that we were, we would often come to class with a hat on because we'd wake up late and we wouldn't do our hair. So we'd be in class with our hats, and whenever he said, put on your theologian hat, we'd turn our hat forward, and whenever he said, put on your historian hat, we'd turn our hat to the side, and whenever he said, put on your sociology hat, we would take our hats off and we would put it on our desk and we would observe it. We were goofballs. What can I say? Shouldn't be a surprise to you. Now, Dr. Lyons, being the big name that he is, the big professor that he is, about 3-4 classes into us doing this, he picked up on it. He picked up on our little game. And instead of calling us out on it, he actually started to, whenever he would say this phrase, put on your whatever cap, he would stop his lecture, he would look at us, we would switch our hat to wherever we needed to put it, and then he would continue on with his lecture. Me and Josh loved it, and because of Dr. Lyons, because of his personality, because he was a very cool and relatable teacher, we became really close to him, both me and Josh. And I remember one time in Dr. Lyons' office, me and Josh went in there and we were just kind of talking about the crucifixion of Jesus, and we got talking about this verse, and he started asking us questions, and he pointed us to chapter 22 of the book of Psalms. And that's where I want to go today, is in chapter 22 of the book of Psalms. It's a psalm by David. And in this psalm, we see such a great parallel, such a great connection between Jesus' words and this poem that David writes in chapter 22 of Psalms. And what it shows us is Christ's power, but also his humanity. Christ's power, but also his relatability. Christ's power, but also how much comfort he offers us in who he is and what he's done. And so that's where we're going to be today in chapter 22 of the book of Psalms. And it starts out the first verse in chapter 22 of the book of Psalms. It says, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Or depending on your translation, abandoned me. It's word for word what Jesus says on the cross. As he's being crucified, he shouts this out. The same words as David here. And as this kind of chapter flows, as David's kind of poem flows, it's this kind of back and forth between David saying, God, I feel like you've abandoned me. God, I feel like you're far off. God, I feel terrified and these things are closing in around me and I don't feel like you're there. And then he switches to, but God, I know. God, I know you are there. God, I know you're close. God, I know you'll be victorious. God, I know you'll rescue me. And David, he goes back and forth in this chapter. This is how I feel, and this is what I know. And I think that's what we see with Jesus' line in Mark. As he's on the cross, Jesus says, my God, why have you abandoned me? He's relating to David. He's relating to David's humanity of, God, I feel like you've abandoned me. But as we go through, we'll see that, God, I know you haven't. God, I know you'll rescue me. God, I know you'll be victorious. And now, not only is Jesus' line on the cross connected to Psalm 22 by just this first verse, it's connected several times by what's called prophecy. Prophecy is basically to say that a specific thing will happen in the future. And so verse 1 is prophecy from David to Jesus as Jesus dies on the cross. But verse 7 is the same. Verse 7 says, all who see me mock me, which happens to Jesus. Verse 8, it says, he trusts in the Lord. Let him deliver him. Let him rescue him, for he delights in him. This is what people are saying to David, and it's what people say to Jesus as they're mocking him as well. We see that in Luke 23. Verse 17, verse 16, 17, and 18, it says, they have pierced my hands and feet. David says this, they have pierced my hands and feet, and we see Jesus as he's crucified, they pierce his hands and feet. 18, it says, they divide my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots, which is what they do to Jesus as well. So we see these prophecies, we see these parallels between David and Jesus. But what I think Jesus is saying as he's on the cross and he says this and cries this out to the Lord, I don't think what's on his mind is prophecy. I don't think even what's on his mind in that time is teaching, even though in that moment he's teaching us. I don't think that's what's on his mind. I think in that moment, Jesus is just revealing and being vulnerable with his humanity. Jesus is not only fully God, but he's fully man. This isn't the only place we see this in Mark chapter 15. But Jesus is not the only place we see Christ's humanity. In Luke chapter 22, Jesus, he goes out and he prays right before he's about to be betrayed, given over to the authorities and going through this process of torture and death. Right before that, he has this prayer with the Lord, and in that prayer, he cries out to the Lord and he says, God, take this cup from me. Take this burden from me. And it tells us in Luke 22, Jesus is like, he's dripping sweat. It's like it's blood just flowing off of him. He's sweating so hard. Jesus says, in his humanity, God, take this cup from me. Take this burden from me. And then Jesus says, but let your will be done. If this is your will, let it be done. And we see the radical faith that Christ has, Christ's faithfulness to the Father. And in his words, as Jesus is dying on the cross, I think it's the same. It's not necessarily prophecy that's on Jesus' mind. It's not, teaching. It's his humanity. It's just him crying out to the Lord. And now, as we go through this chapter, and as we get to kind of the halfway point of this chapter 22, the book of Psalms, David, he says, but you, O Lord, do not be far off. And he kind of pivots here, and he goes and he starts saying things like, God will not abandon me. He's gone from, God, I feel like you've abandoned me, to, God, I know you haven't. And in verse 24, David says this, Psalm 22, verse 24, for he has not despised or abhorred the affliction of the afflicted, but he has not hidden his face from him. He has heard when he cried to him. David right here is saying, God, I know you haven't abandoned me. God, I feel like you have, but here he's saying, God, I know you haven't. I know you. I know your character. I know you haven't. And in verses 25 through 30, David basically just says, God, I know you'll rescue me. God, I know you'll be victorious. In this chapter, it ends. The last verse of this chapter, David says, they shall come and proclaim his righteousness to a people yet unborn. Which is exactly what Christ does in his death and his resurrection. Christ, in that, has the power of proclaiming righteousness to people that are unborn. Jesus, in his ministry, talks about people being born again. People being born again and being sons of God. Sons and daughters of God. This chapter ends, the last 4 words of this chapter. It ends and it says, he has done it. That's how chapter 22 of the book of Psalms ends. It says, he has done it. And I can't help but think back to Jesus' last words on the cross. It says in John 19:30, Jesus says, it is finished. And what's so cool is we see all these parallels, we see all these connections between what Jesus says and what happened in the lead up and the build up to his crucifixion. We see so many parallels between Jesus and between David in Psalm 22. But why is this significant is a question that we should be asking ourselves. We see the power of Christ, we see his humanity, but why? What does this mean for us? Why is this a comfort to us? It's a comfort to us. It's been a comfort to me because there is no one that can relate better to me and my struggles than Christ. There is no one that can comfort me like Christ can. And so when I'm in places in my life where I say, God, I feel like you're far off. God, I have this anxiety. God, I feel overwhelmed. God, I feel stressed. Which is places that I've been the last couple months. There is no one better qualified to relate to me and to comfort me than Christ. And as I've come to know that, as I've come to realize that, those moments, I know I can cry out to God. I don't have to be ashamed of that. I don't have to hold that. I can cry out to God and I can say, God, I feel stressed. I feel overwhelmed. I feel so much anxiety with everything going on in the world, with everything going on at our church, everything going on with me in my life right now. These are moments that I've been at and I've cried out to God, God, I feel this, but God, I've read your word. God, I know you. And God, I know your power. God, I know your power to comfort me. God, I know your power to relate to me and where I'm at. And it has been this line, my God, why have you abandoned me? And pointing back to Psalm 22, it has been such a comfort for me these last couple months. As I've been in these places, I know I can go to God and say, God, I feel this, but I know you. I know you will be victorious. God, I know even though I fall, you will pick me up. Because it's who you are, it's what you do. And as I end here, guys, I want to ask you this same question. As you've seen this line from Jesus, as we've gone through this chapter in Psalms, do you know God's power in your life? Do you know God's power to comfort you? Do you know God's power to relate to you and to where you're at and to the struggles that you're in right now? Do you know his power? Guys, his power is something that there's nothing more fulfilling. There's nothing that will bring you more joy and more peace than his power to save, his power to comfort. Do you know his power? And if you feel like you're in a place where you're saying to yourself, no, I don't. I don't know his power. I would love to talk to you. I would love to be able to sit down with you and show you more stories in here that show God's power and his comfort, to show Christ's power and his humanity, to show Christ's power and his relatability to us, as he is both fully God and fully man. I would love to show you in this book those stories, come alongside you and show you those. And I would love to show you and talk with you in my life, how God has worked in my life, because it has been so significant for me. Guys, I love you so much. I will be back soon this week, tomorrow, with a devotional out of the book of Proverbs. Until then, I'll see you guys soon. Love you, miss you. Bye-bye.